Dr. Peterson, with all the radical policy shifts we're seeing lately, from crackdowns, from sudden crackdowns on immigration to rapid changes in social norms, why can't the government just flip a switch to a better system? If a policy is logically superior, why shouldn't it be implemented immediately for everyone's benefit?
Well, that's a deep, complex question. And you have to be very careful with the flip a switch mentality, because society is not a static object. It's a hyper-complex living organism. And when we decide to fix it, we are performing surgery on a system whose arteries extend back into deep evolutionary time. There is a naive Enlightenment era assumption that if we just identify a bad system, say a brutal totalitarian dictatorship, and we flip it over to a free society, the problem is solved. But it's not that simple, not by a long shot. Think about the metaphor of a pendulum. If a society is shoved far to one side into total, rigid, soul-crushing control, the natural human instinct is to push back. But if the push is too violent, if the change is too sudden, the pendulum doesn't just stop at perfectly free. It swings violently to the other extreme. You go from the tyranny of order to the tyranny of chaos. And, well, we see this today, don't we? With the sudden expanse of, let's call it globalism. It was pushed so far and so fast that it created a vacuum of identity and massive logistical friction. And that's what leads inevitably to the current immigration crises we're seeing in both developing and developed nations. And you have to be careful here, because one side pushed the pendulum so far, they were so certain of their own moral superiority, that the other side now wants to fix it. And they want to fix it so badly, so desperately, that they are swinging the pendulum back toward the far right. And that's the danger, because it gets mixed in with reactionary forces. And then what happens? In many cases, the rules the governments place, the restrictions they impose, they become even harder, even more restrictive than they were before the globalism thing happened in the first place. You aren't fixing the system, you're just trading one kind of catastrophe for another, more rigid set of, reactionary shackles. And you have to ask yourself, why is that happening? It brings us to this, to paternalism. And you have to wrap your head around the arrogance of that concept. It's the state acting as the pater, the father, interfering with your autonomy under the claim that it's for your own good. It's the assumption that the experts in the high towers know what you need better than you know yourself. Now, look, structure is necessary. You need a backbone. But when the state forces these radical shifts, globalism, or certain radical forms of feminism, without considering if the people are actually psychologically prepared for it, it becomes toxic. They treat the 99% like infants who don't need to be consulted, only managed. And that is a recipe for a total breakdown of the social map. And here is the part, the crucial part, that the social engineers truly fail to grasp. The psychological impact on the individual when this sudden paternalistic change occurs. We rely on a predictable social map to regulate our very neurochemistry. We need to know where we stand. And when that map is liquidated overnight, you create a profound sense of ontological insecurity. Think about the people associated with the old way. You can't just invert their world, even for a justified cause, and expect stability. You just can't. If a population has been schooled to think a certain way for 40 years, telling them their values are suddenly a lie, doesn't make them adapt, breaks them. It creates a form of grief and cognitive disorientation akin to PTSD. And that creates a massive wave of dissatisfaction toward the government, because the government was supposed to be the backbone that provided stability. And suddenly, The backbone is snapping under the weight of its own ideological vanity. Social change cannot be a sudden rupture. It must be a slow, disciplined transition through education. You have to remember, 99% of the people are not politicians. They are normal people whose psychology matters. If you don't allow for a human pace, you don't get progress, you get a breakdown. But here's the pocketbook problem. Governments rarely choose the slow path. They prioritize their own short-term financial gain and power over the long-term psychological health of the citizenry. This disregard for the normal person is exactly what fuels the pendulum's violent swings, until leadership realizes that national stability depends on the psychological stability of the people, not just a bank account. We are doomed to keep swinging from one catastrophe to the next. So to answer your question, you don't flip a switch on a living organism unless you're prepared to kill it. You have to nurture it, or you're just inviting the chaos to come home to roost. So,
thank you very much.
Good, not good.
Yeah, so my view is that at this point in the United States, the Republican Party is...
But even the biology of other people, because we're wired to accept behavior from children that we wouldn't accept from other people. Another marker we use for illness is suffering, right? We generally presume two things. We assume that materialist view, like the standard scientific view of the world, of course, is that it's made up of familiar objects. The known is explored territory. And the knower is the explorer. And that's how we